Welcome to the November 5th Sandag Regional Planning Committee meeting. And before we get started, I would like our interpreter, Carlos, to introduce himself and walk us how to access our interpretation services. Are you there, Carlos?
I am. Thank you, Chair Salas. As the Chair just indicated, we do have interpretation available. In the event that there are Spanish comments or questions, we invite all monolingual English speakers to take advantage of the service. To do so, please scroll down to the bottom of the Zoom screen where your meeting controls are, then click on the interpretation icon. It looks like a little world, and then select English as your language. If you are joining through the Zoom mobile app on a cell phone, tablet, or other mobile device, first press the ellipsis, the three dots.
I need to interrupt. I'm so sorry.
Yes.
We are in need of one more. I confused one of the members with an advisory member. Sorry about that.
I was saying, if you have already found the icon, you would select English. If you don't see the icon, first press the ellipsis, the three dots, then press interpretation, and that will allow you to choose your language. And finally, click on mute original audio to not hear the original Spanish low in the background. I will now repeat these instructions in Spanish. Muy buenas tardes. Se está ofreciendo servicio de interpretación simultánea para esta sesión de del Comité de Planeación Regional de Sandag. Para hacer uso del servicio, solo es necesario que se desplace a la parte inferior de su pantalla de Zoom, donde aparecen sus controles. De ahí haga clic en el icono de interpretación, parece un globo terráqueo, y seleccione Spanish o español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom, en celular, tableta, etc., presione primero los puntos suspensivos, luego interpretación y luego el idioma. Por último, si no desea escuchar el audio original en inglés en el fondo, por favor seleccione Mute Original Audio o silenciar audio original. Gracias and thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Evelia, do we still have a lack of a quorum?
Evelia, we do have quorum.
Yes, we have a quorum.
Okay, with that, let's all start with the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'll join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So, Evelia, could you please call the roll? I guess we don't need to call roll.
Yes. City of San Diego, Council Member Elio Rivera.
Present.
County of San Diego, Supervisor Tara Reamer.
Present.
East County. Mayor John Minto. North County Coastal, Mayor Lisa Hebner.
Present.
North County Inland, Mayor Rebecca Jones. In South County, Chair Mayor Salas.
Present. So with that, I'd like to remind everyone of our process for both member and public comments. Members are asked to use the raise hand icon on the Zoom bar and turn on their cameras when they have a comment or question, and then I will recognize you. If you are a member of the public and would like to speak on an item, please use the raise hand icon on the Zoom bar, and once we reach that item on the agenda. If you are calling into the meeting, please press *9 on your phone if you would like to comment on an item. All comments, whether emailed or live, will be made part of today's meeting record. So, okay, with that, we'll start with item number 1, which is public comments and communications. Do we have any? So this is to comment on any item that is not on today's agenda. Evelia, are there any raised hands?
Chair, this is Sandeg Production. I'm not sure if she's having an issue with her microphone, but you do not have any public hands
Okay.
raised.
All right, thank you. Next, are there any comments from the committee members? Okay, seeing,
There are no hands raised for the public members.
okay, so let's move on to item number 2, the executive director's report, and Ray Trainer is here today to give the executive director's report. Welcome, Ray.
Thank you, Chair Salas and members of the Regional Planning Committee. It's good to see you all today. Hey, a lot of you probably noticed that there's been some news about a 0.5-cent sales tax that could be put to the voters next year. And we just wanted to let you know that that initiative is not sponsored or promoted by Sandag in any way. It's a group that's outside of Sandag that's leading that effort. But that said, we're really excited about any efforts that would help to implement the region's vision. So we just wanted to make that clear to all of you. Another thing that Hassan wanted me to share today is that we're really excited about a recent release of a request for innovative concepts. Our team has been working hard as they've been developing the regional plan. And concurrent with that, we're preparing a request for industry to help us understand what industry is ready to do, particularly in the areas of technology and mobility. So we're really excited that that request has been put out onto the street. We're going to be coordinating with a number of respondents that we hope over the next couple of months. Proposals would be due in the January timeframe, and then we'll bring that back to you at the board as well as the committee to help you understand what kind of responses we're getting that would help us to begin to look at early implementation of some of the exciting concepts in the regional plan. Wanted to take a moment just to let you know and recognize our data science and analytics team. They had just launched a new interactive tool this week that takes a look at the unemployment story map for the region. And I think as you start to explore that, you'll find it on the sandag.org website. I think you're going to find it a really compelling new tool that will help you give some insights as to what's happening with unemployment rates by community. And we also now have overlaid the information about digital access. So I think you're going to find it really starts to underscore the work we've got to do in the region when it comes to equity, which is really one of the underlying goals of the 2021 regional plan. So if you haven't taken a moment, if you haven't seen that announcement, please visit sandag.org and explore this new tool. And then the final thing we wanted to do is, Jim, if you're on, I'd like to invite our Chief of Capital Projects, Jim Linthicum, to give you a brief update on the Mid-Coast Light Rail project.
My camera's still not on. Let's see.
There you
There
are.
we go. All right. Well, thank you very much, Ray. You know, we are so excited to talk about Mid-Coast. Well, first of all, we're always excited to talk about Mid-Coast. But after exactly 5 years of construction, we're getting ready to open this thing. And this is the region's biggest transportation project we've ever delivered. And it's still on time. And what we always follow, it's still on budget. And what we always follow that is with on time. We're pretty sure it's still on time, but I would just want to share with you some of the issues that we're having. You know, we're just 16 days away from what we call revenue service, where we take paying customers on Sunday, the 21st of November. And we've been sharing a lot with the public and with our board of directors, some of the problems we've been having getting materials, the materials that we need to finish the work, just on the 5 aerial stations that are at the north end of the job. And why? It's the same thing we're all experiencing, right? The supply chain problems. And so the good news is, unlike a month ago, we now have all these materials on site and our contractors rushing to get them installed. But these delays in the delivery of materials have eaten into the very, very last thing we do before we open a project to the public. And that's getting regulatory approval to operate. Because you can just imagine all the regulations and things that the checks and balances that the folks need to sign off on before we start taking, tens of thousands of people. So we're working really close with these folks in the field, but we've also raised the issues to their leadership to ensure that we get cooperation and timely inspection. So we think we're okay, but that is that last thing. That those supply chain issues ate into all of our extra time, we call it our float time, to finish this thing up. So we're planning on all things being a go, and we hope to see each and every one of you at the big grand opening event on the 21st of November up at Warren Field at UCSD. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim. So Chair Salas, that concludes the Executive Director's report for you.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, Ray, and thank you, Jim. And we're all looking forward to November 21st. And I won't be there to join you. I am so sad, but I've had something planned for over a year that I can't get out of. So with that, we'll go on to item number 5, which is the consent agenda. And there are 3 items, item 3 through 5. And so if we can move on to that. I'm sorry, consent is items 3 through 5. So do we have any member comments on the consent agenda? Okay, I see somebody waving their hand, and that is that's Lisa Hebner. Okay, so
Thanks,
Lisa.
Chair Salas. I was looking at the minutes and I noticed that the minutes on June 4th show Matt Hall in my place as attending instead of myself, who did attend on June 4th. So if you could please correct that, and I would be happy to make a motion to approve the rest of the minutes with that correction.
Okay, with that, Avelia, did we receive any public comments or any requests to speak?
There are no hands raised for public comments. Chair Salas.
Okay, and I will second the motion made by Mayor Hebner. And so can we call for the roll call vote?
City of San Diego. Councilmember Sean Elio Rivera.
Elu Rivera, yes.
County of San Diego, Supervisor Tara Lawson Remer.
Yes.
East County. Councilmember George Gassel. North County Coastal, Mayor Lisa Hebner.
Yes.
North County Inland, Mayor Rebecca Jones. South County, Chair Mary Salas.
Yes. So the consent calendar passes unanimously with East County and North County Inland absent. So with that, we'll go on to item number 6. And item number 6 is the Housing Incentive Program Overview and Housing Acceleration Program and the Smart Growth and the TransNet Smart Growth Incentive Program Call for Projects. And Sandag staff, Tuari Fabiola is here, and Jenny Russo are presenting this item. So the show's all yours.
Thank you, Mayor Salas. Thank you. And good afternoon, Regional Planning Committee members. And I know that was a mouthful to say, Chair, so thank you so much for that. But I'm Tuari Fabiola, and I'm a Principal Regional Planner here at Sandag. And it is a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon to give an overview of Sandag's Housing Incentive Program and new funding opportunities for our local jurisdictions. Up and down the state, people are coming to the realization that the housing crisis, which also includes home ownership, is an issue that needs to be addressed regionally. And I'm here to talk to you about Sandag's approach to housing acceleration and smart growth, as well as the upcoming funding opportunities. Next slide. So in 2019, the state legislature passed Assembly Bill 101, And this provided one-time grant funding through the California Department of Housing and Community Development, otherwise known as HCD, to regional metropolitan planning organizations like SANDAG to collaborate on housing projects at a regional scale, but also to position regional governments to help locals achieve their housing goals and facilitate housing production. And this program is called Regional Early Action Planning, and you'll hear me and my colleague Jenny refer to it as REAP throughout this presentation. Next slide. So the REAP allocation for SANDAG was 6.8 million, and it has to be expended by 2023. So it's a very quick turnaround on those funds. We received 1.7 million in 2020, and I'm really happy to report that we just received our award letter for the additional 5.1 million just this Monday. So we're super happy about that. Next slide. So one of the first steps in our efforts to start a housing program here at SANDAG was to survey our local jurisdictions. So we reached out to the planning directors through our regional planning technical working group, and we asked them to discuss their biggest challenges towards accelerating housing production. And while they certainly stated to us many barriers that they face, one of the biggest concerns that we heard was there was a need for more regional leadership and more regional resources to help them achieve their housing goals. So we took that feedback and we started looking at best practices around California and the nation, and our team identified resources that SANDAG can offer to the local jurisdictions. This is from educational opportunities, regional guidance for anti-displacement strategies, looking at how we can provide additional funding opportunities, and that's part of why we're also here today, and several others that are outlined in your staff report. Next slide. We also recognize that part of establishing SANDAG's role as a regional pro-housing leader is to create a plan for a regional housing framework. So our housing framework that we're proposing will focus on the 5 Ps that I'm going to explain here that are on your screen. So one is producing housing for all, really setting forth standards of zoning that allow for a variety of housing types to be developed with a goal to meet the housing needs of all income levels. Preserving vulnerable housing, which is analyzing units that are at risk of losing their affordability and discussing the cost of what it would take to either preserve that housing or replace it. And then also preventing displacement. So establishing priorities that help prevent displacement, which does include acknowledging and understanding that there were past injustices that have resulted in redline communities and have displaced many low income and communities of color. And then also protecting tenants. The COVID-19 pandemic showed us that the importance of housing stability for our residents throughout the county, and protecting tenants placed an emphasis on community stability, and something that I think many of us want to see continue. And then last, but certainly not least, promoting equity and sustainability. So this part of our regional framework is intentional on focusing on how we dismantle the structural and systemic barriers that prevent the promise of opportunity for everyone to have home ownership and having the appropriate amount of homes available for everyone. So next slide. So through this new funding opportunity and the ability to create a housing program here at SANDAG, we also recognize that housing production and our sustainable community strategy and climate goals are linked together. We need to accelerate the production of housing, but we also need to reduce vehicles miles traveled, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve air quality, and much more. And we're also thinking about all of this as we're developing our new housing program with all those goals in mind. Next slide. So when we're looking at housing acceleration and smart growth, you may ask, okay, so tell me a little bit more. And the numbers on the screen here are a reminder to us all about the ambitious goals that we have for our region. We need over 171,000 new homes by 2029, and we need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 19% by 2035. And so that's really why we've started to look at what we need to do with our housing program, which is really looking at producing housing, but also taking smart growth concepts and coupling that together. And we took a really bold new approach when we developed our 2021 regional plan. We also really need to start looking at how we can take bold approaches for how we're going to address housing and the homeownership crisis in our region. Next slide. And of that 171,000 units, 68,959 need to be produced for what is considered low and very low income. And we understand that the market alone may be able to take care of the market rate housing, but the challenge in our region, and it's not one that's not shared not shared by just us alone, it's one that is statewide, is the production of affordable and equitable housing. And if we're able to increase the amount of affordable homes in our region, it increases the number of people who can achieve home ownership and ultimately improves our local economy and provides an opportunity to build new generational wealth throughout San Diego. Next slide. So where do we start with all of this? Well, in addition to the efforts that I mentioned earlier, from creating a housing framework to identifying the other regional initiatives, we're also providing 2 grant opportunities for our local jurisdictions. A new one, which is our Housing Acceleration Program, that we're using those REAP funds that we receive from the state, and then also a call for projects with our TransNet Smart Growth Incentive Program. And the reason we're releasing them together is that they're complementary and that they can support our regional goals to accelerate housing production, and also how we can look at trying to start achieving more of those climate goals that we have as individual cities through our climate action plans, but also the goals that we have as a region. And each grant program is worth or is valued at $3 million, and it puts money into the hands of our local jurisdictions to really start to allow planning, not just only here at Sandag, but really at all levels, so at the local level as well. So I'd now like to turn it over to my colleague, Jenny Russo, who leads Sandag's grants program, to talk to you in more detail about each grant opportunity and our request for recommendation today.
Good afternoon. Next slide, please. This table outlines the 2 grant programs and their differences. To highlight some of the biggest differences seen here, the Housing Acceleration Program guarantees a minimum of $125,000 per applicant that meets the minimum eligibility requirements. Eligible activities under the Housing Acceleration Planning Grant could be developing objective design standards, temporary staff augmentation, creating tools to support ADU ordinances, and more. And as Tuari mentioned earlier, there is an expenditure deadline of 2023. The Smart Growth Incentive Program is similar to what this committee and others have seen in the past. One aspect I'd like to call out is we are encouraging those cities who we heard from that want to start planning for mobility hubs to apply for this grant program to initiate that work. Next slide, please. Jumping into the criteria for the Housing Acceleration Program, here you can see the eligibility and scoring criteria that will be used. Minimum eligibility includes projects that are within a smart growth area, cities with a cap or working towards the development of a cap, and at least 1 pro-housing policy in place. For the scoring criteria, we have the points spread across the categories seen here, with the highest points allocated towards furthering mobility hub implementation, pro-housing planning, and equity. Next slide, please. Pro-housing activities might be a new concept for this committee and some of our applicants. The state has developed a pro-housing designation program that provides incentives to cities and counties to adopt pro-housing policies and practices to become eligible to compete for housing, community development, and infrastructure program funding. The categories seen here include some of the activities jurisdictions would need to demonstrate to show their approach to pro-housing policies. Next slide, please. In an effort to streamline the application process, our team has simplified the criteria for the Smart Growth Incentive Program. The eligibility is very similar to the Housing Acceleration Program, with the exception of no pro-housing policy being needed. And similarly, there's an emphasis on smart growth planning, furthering mobility hubs, and equity. Next slide, please. In February 2021, Sandag adopted our commitment to equity statement. As a result, criteria related to equity has been integrated into both the Housing Acceleration and Smart Growth Incentive programs. Integrating equity is not only something that's required as a commitment by our board, but is also now required as part of a jurisdiction's housing element. Effective January 1st, 2021, new housing elements must now address how they will be affirmatively furthering fair housing. This means how they will facilitate deliberate action to address, combat, and relieve disparities of housing discrimination. We have broken the equity criteria into 3 categories for jurisdictions. First is citywide strategies. Second is strategies to attract investment into lower resource areas. And third is strategies to attract affordable housing or housing choice in higher opportunity areas. Next slide, please. Today, we are asking the Regional Planning Committee to recommend that the Board of Directors approve the evaluation criteria and release the call of projects for both the Housing Acceleration Program and Smart Growth Incentive Program, and proposed waivers as outlined in our staff report for Board Policies 33 and 35. Next slide. And I'll now turn it over for any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Jenny and Tawari. So thank you for that presentation, and it's always good to receive funding for housing that we desperately need. And the question is I'm so glad that we're focused on the equity part of it, because there's good and bad about redevelopment in communities, especially the downtown areas where I live in, right, where it's a transitional and changing neighborhood. What we're seeing a lot of investors come into our communities, purchasing apartment complexes and other smaller homes, rehabbing them. But really, the downside of that is driving people that have lived there for many and a really good thing. How are you going to make sure, though, that is one developer get control of the property?
Hi, Chair
Does anybody
Salas.
have an answer? Yes.
I'm sorry, I think your audio was cutting out a little bit there and I didn't fully hear your question. Would you mind repeating the question? And I did just want to check with our clerk. Do we need to open up for public comments first before we go into Q&A with the members, or?
Okay,
Yes,
whatever you
usually there is a discussion for members before you go into this.
right. So normally at our city councils, at least before we open it up for public comments, it's questions only.
Okay.
For
Yes,
board
please.
members. Yeah. So the question was, I'm glad that we have the equity component in this. How are we going to make sure that, once projects are approved, that the developers or the investors remain true to that commitment?
Yeah, so I think that's really where we're starting to flesh out the program. We're just at the beginning stages of developing the housing incentive program here at Sandag. And so we're taking in a lot of, we're surveying local jurisdictions to understand where some of the challenges are in developing for affordable housing. And so the question that you're raising is one that we've heard, and it's something that we're looking at how we address when we talk about the 5 Ps and the framework for a regional housing framework, and looking at equity and sustainability and inclusion, and how we make sure that what is said in terms of, producing affordable housing, even when it comes to the length of time for which that development would remain affordable. Does it stay in perpetuity, or is it for a specific period of time? Those are all things that I don't have the answer for right now, but it's something that we are looking at addressing as part of that housing framework.
Okay, thank you very much. And I see that at least Mayor Hebner has her hand up, followed by Councilmember Sean Elo Rivera.
Thanks. I'm going to actually move on, tag on to what you were talking about, Chair Salas, because displacement comes from 2 things. And one of them is gentrification. And it's not just my city, but obviously Chula Vista and colleagues all over the region I'm speaking to are finding the same thing. So I'm wondering if during this discussion and the delving in further into this particular area of the 5 that you pointed out, there could be some brainstorming about what can be done about that. I mean, I've always thought maybe what could happen is that the developers can be provided a tax break if they were to remodel and upgrade, but maintain the affordable prices. So just a couple of nudges from this committee that we really look at that as one of the sources of the lack of affordable housing in our entire region. And the other question that I have is regarding one of the last slides was speaking about higher opportunity areas. And I know that what we find, and we lost a project because we were told that it was each of the units were too expensive per unit and that they could get more for their money in other areas in the region. Yet we still have a moral obligation and desire to provide affordable housing, and we have our RENA numbers. So I'm hoping that there will be some look at the criteria that will consider that there are higher land values in certain areas of our region than in other areas. And I guess I should have formed that into a question. Sorry, Chair.
Would you like me to respond?
Go
I would
ahead.
love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, and so I
Sure.
think, even though you're not forming it into a question, again, you are bringing up very, very good points. And we certainly do want to look at those higher opportunity areas as opportunities for where we need to achieve additional housing, and affordable housing being one of those as well. And so this is where we're starting to, again, look at how we can start to facilitate that leadership and providing that guidance from a regional perspective. Right now, a lot of that burden has been on the locals. And so this is where the state is starting to see that there's regional leadership needed to help facilitate and help the locals to achieve these kinds of goals. So this is something that we want to look at. We would want to discuss with you and the planners within Solana Beach, as well as within all of the other 18 cities in the county, and discuss that further and how we can structure our framework to really tackle these issues. So thank you for the comments. We certainly appreciate, and we're taking note, and we want to make sure that we're capturing everything that is being said to start integrating it into our housing framework.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Elo Rivera.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation here. Some really, really good stuff in here. So one of the things that there's a lot there that I really appreciated. One of the things that I'm kind of curious about is the extent to which the Housing Acceleration Program will be available. Those funds will be available to cities that have been proactive in terms of putting forward pro-housing policies, but with a little bit of a technical assistance or a little bit of additional support, like a true acceleration of housing production by kind of building upon that foundation that's already been laid. For example, in the city of San Diego, we have probably, and it's controversial, but probably the most aggressive ADU policy, perhaps in the state, and that goes well beyond what was required of us by the state of California. And there's some incredible opportunity in that to achieve some of the goals that you all laid out. So I'm curious to what extent there will be prioritization or some sort of distinction between those cities that have already passed pro-housing policies and those that are looking to kind of lay the initial steps in terms of pro-housing policies. How are we going to distinguish those? How are we going to prioritize those different municipalities?
Thank you for the question. So I'll kick things off, and then Jenny, feel free to please chime in afterwards and just the process. So in terms of the Housing Acceleration Program and the grant funds that we're distributing, the minimum eligibility does include having a pro-housing, activity that the city is currently underway and doing. And so most cities, if they can identify one pro-housing activity, they will be able to reach the minimum eligibility, and that would guarantee them at least $125,000. And so the program is for $3 million. And so those cities who would like to put forward a request in their application for more than the minimum that we're guaranteeing of $125,000 can certainly, fill out the rest of the application and go through all of the criteria. One of our criteria is about pro-housing, and it does award 20 points out of 100. If you can start to explain that you're doing not just one thing, but you're doing multiple things related to pro-housing activities, which could elevate that particular applicant in terms of their scoring, giving them more priority in terms of the ranking. But we would also have to weigh that against all of the other jurisdictions who are submitting. So I think that it'll come down to what the applicant puts into their application, but there's 20 points of 100 that are focused on pro-housing.
Again, then I don't know if Jenny wanted to add on there.
Well, I guess if it's not clear, so we have the $125,000 minimum for all the jurisdictions that apply. And then what's left out of that, the residual goes into the secondary competitive process. So that's what Tueri's talking about with points, is then the folks that are interested in additional funding for additional projects, that's where they would compete. And things like pro-housing policies will gain you more points. It'll bring you up to the top of the list to be eligible to receive a lot more funding.
Thanks to Ari and Jenny. Yeah, some really good stuff in here. I particularly appreciate the emphasis on both creating affordable housing opportunities in high opportunity neighborhoods. That's super important to me, and avoiding displacement and encouraging development in traditionally underinvested in and historically redline communities. So tackling the situation from both places, I think, is super smart. It's holistic. It and has an appropriate appreciation for how we got to where we are, not just with respect to the lack of housing production, but for the pretty gross disparities that we see with respect to wealth building opportunities as well. So thank you for the presentation here. Glad to see Sandag leaning in this way. And I think, Chair, you're waiting for the motion comes after public comment, correct?
Correct. I'll reserve it for you if you'd like to make it, though.
I'll be happy to make it once the time comes.
Okay. So do we have any public comments? Any requests to speak?
I don't see, well, there is a hand raised in the public comments from Kevin Lee.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Hi, thanks for having me on. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Thank you for the presentations. I just had a question about one of the ideals of promoting sustainability. Is there somewhere in the framework that promotes environmental sustainability, like maybe giving additional points for using sustainable building materials, making sure buildings are retrofitted, or are these kind of falling to individual municipalities to kind of have developers abide by their environmental standards for building? But yeah, that's my question.
Chair, would
Did
you?
anybody? Yes, please respond.
Okay, so yes, there is within the call for projects in terms of the competitive portion, there is points for sustainability, and we are looking for where the project is located as far as it in a climate resilient area. And we're looking at those areas being those with lower risk to fires, flooding, or impacts to sea level rise. But we're also taking into consideration if the applicant can explain how they minimize impacts to climate change, which would leave it more broad and open for someone to explain that in terms of the types of building materials, products, clean energy that they may be able to propose for being a sustainable and climate resilient project.
Okay, Kevin, did that answer your question? Am I frozen?
He is no longer on.
Oh, okay, all right. So if that was the last comment, then we do have a motion. Well, Sean, would you like to restate the motion?
Sure, Chair. Yeah, happy to move staff's recommendation.
I'm happy to second.
Okay. All right, and that was seconded by Mayor Huebner as well. Elvia, would you please take the roll call vote?
City of San Diego,
Yes.
County of San Diego, Supervisor Tara Lawson-Bremer,
Yes. Yes.
thank you. East County is absent. North County Coastal, Mayor Lisa Huebner.
Yes.
North County Inland is absent. South County.
Yes.
Chair.
Yes. So the recommendation, yes.
The recommendation. Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
go ahead.
The recommendation passes with East County absent and North County absent.
Hey, I didn't mean to take your job there. Okay, so we will move on to item number 7, and that is the TransNet Environmental Mitigation Program and the fiscal year 2022 annual budget. And Kim Smith will present this for us.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Salas, and good afternoon, members of the Regional Planning Committee. My name is Kim Smith, and I am the Program Manager for the Environmental Mitigation Program here at SANDAG. Item number 7 on your agenda today is related to actions necessary to implement the program in fiscal year 2022. Next slide, please. So just as a quick reminder, the TransNet Environmental Mitigation Program provides funding to mitigate habitat impacts from our local and regional transportation projects and funding from regional land management and biological monitoring. And it does this by acquiring and managing large tracts of land with native habitats early in advance of those projects that need mitigation. And it's really allowed us to reduce cost, accelerate the delivery of those transportation projects, implement our regional habitat conservation plans, and reduce the listing of species as threatened and endangered. Next slide, please. So today's request focuses specifically on the Habitat Conservation Fund. This is funding for the regional land management and biological provisions of the EMP. To implement the EMP, the SANDAG Board of Directors entered into an MOA with Caltrans, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. This MOA was originally signed in 2008 and renewed in 2019, and it outlines the implementation strategy of the EMP. The MOA includes the allocation of $4 million per year for 20 years to assist in funding the gaps in regional land management and biological monitoring to maintain our regional preserve system. And it's really a safety net that helps to protect our TransNet investments and help eliminate the need for future listing of endangered species. Staff, with the assistance of the EMP working group, developed the 2-year work plan that identifies those key tasks and milestones. Per the MOA, annual funding for each fiscal year totaling $4 million is then reviewed and approved by the SANDAG board. And then finally, the work is then implemented through consultant contracts and our land management grants. For example, the picture on the bottom is of the American badger. SANDAG has been working with the United States Geological Survey to collect data on where these badgers live and how they move to better assess habitats and threats and find ways to improve connectivity and reduce the mortality of the species, which is not easily understood in San Diego County. In addition, roughly half of the $4 million allocated annually has been used for our very successful land management grant program. To date, we have completed 9 cycles of this grant program, and we just released the 10th cycle out to the public last week. This top photo shows the San Diego Zoo's efforts as part of a completed grant project that developed a conservation breeding program for the western burrowing owl, which you can kind of see in that picture. And they successfully established the first translocated population at the Rancho Homol Ecological Preserve in South San Diego County. Next slide, please. So I did mention the 2-year work plan. So what is that 2-year work plan? The 2-year work plan implements the goals and objectives of the management strategic plan shown above, which was developed and approved in 2017. The management strategic plan is a technical document that provides recommendations for species. Priorities are based on species endangerment, habitat types, threats, and opportunities. And it develops regional objectives for efficient and effective use of our regional management and monitoring funding. Staff worked with the EMP working group to take those technical recommendations from the MSP and develop them into a work plan for fiscal year 21-22. The work plan was then approved by the SANDAG board last year in October of 2020. The work plan shown in attachment 1, pages 59 to 68 of your report, defines those goals and milestones proposed for completion in fiscal years 21 and 22. The work plan also tracks and monitors those implementation actions so we can measure our success. Next slide, please. Attachment 2, page 69 of your report, depicts specific recommendations for the allocation of fiscal year 2022 funding for regional management and biological monitoring, split between the 4 strategic goals: promoting sensitive species, promoting native vegetation communities, improving wildlife movement, and promoting regional collaboration. Examples of some of those key milestones Sandag will be working on for each goal include: for sensitive species, the photo on the top left shows the coastal cactus wren, which is a species that is currently in decline in San Diego County due to loss of habitat. Sandag has been working with USGS and regional partners on a study that looks at wren habitat, reproduction, and foraging behaviors to help in developing conservation and management recommendations for land managers. In addition, this year, they will be finishing up a genetic study that helps to look at wren inbreeding and how that affects their survival and productivity. For promoting native vegetation communities, staff has been working on developing and implementing a regional vegetation monitoring strategy that will help us determine how different habitat types, like the coastal sage scrub habitat shown in the middle slide, are doing in the San Diego region. For wildlife movement, well, I can't really, in any of my presentations, I can't really talk about wildlife movement without showing the mountain lion. And we're working with UC Davis and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife on developing a regional camera monitoring strategy for the mountain lion. And this strategy is going to be using artificial intelligence software so that we can take all the picture data that we collect from these cameras, and they'll be able to individually recognize individual mountain lions by their photo. And this is going to help us evaluate population trends for the species that currently is a candidate for listing as threatened. And then finally, regional collaboration. So we've been working with the EMP working group and the jurisdictions and our regional partners to take all of the data that we've been collecting since the inception of our program and developing metrics that's going to measure the overall health of our preserve system. And I'm happy to say that we do have a draft report that's currently in review. And the results of that draft report will be presented in early 2022 to all the PACs and the board and the public. Next slide, please. So today, the Regional Planning Committee is asked to recommend that the Board of Directors approve the allocation of $4 million in funding for fiscal year 2022 for regional management monitoring. That concludes my presentation, and I would be happy to take any questions anyone may have.
Okay, thank you very much. So at this time, I will follow the format that Evelia has here. So right now, would the members of the public please raise your hands if you have any comments on this item? And Elvia, do we have any public comments?
I don't see any hands raised, Mayor Salas.
Okay, are there any member questions or comments?
There are no hands raised.
Okay, so seeing none, may I get a motion for item number 7 to recommend to the Board of Directors to approve the allocation of $4 million in funding for fiscal year 2022?
Move approval, Hebner.
Okay, Hebner moves approval, and I'll second it. And so we have a second and a motion. So can you please call the roll?
City of San Diego,
Yes.
County of San Diego, Supervisor Tara Lawson Remer.
Yes.
East County, absent. North County Coastal, Mayor Lisa Hebner.
Yes.
North County Inland, absent. South County, Chair Mary Salas.
Yes. Yes.
And the recommendation passes with East County and North County Inland absent.
Okay, if there's no further comments, we'll move on to number 8, which is the upcoming meetings. And so the next Regional Planning Committee meeting is scheduled for December the 3rd, 2021. And I do want to make one comment, though. I was really glad that Ray Major clarified that all the talk that's going on right now of a tax measure for transportation infrastructure is being driven by the community. It's a citizens initiative, so I know there's been a lot of confusion even among board members, that Sandag has been promoting this. So I really thank you for the clarification. Another point of misunderstanding out there in the public is during our last meeting when we were discussing the RTIP and talking about changes as a result from comments to the EIR. Many people misunderstood, even some of the TV stations misunderstood and said that we had already taken a vote on this, which of course is not true. It will come in the future, but not at this. It didn't happen at that meeting. So with that, we will adjourn to our next meeting. Thank you very much and have a wonderful weekend.